A selections of quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a permanent attitude. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Never succumb to the temptation of bitterness. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. We may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into friend. There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because conscience tells him it is right. Let no man pull you so low as to hate him. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. The time is always right to do what is right. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be a sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or fail. Be the best of whatever you are. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. For when people get caught up with that which is right, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. There is nothing more tragic than to find an individual bogged down in the length of life, devoid of breadth. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrated than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. A lie cannot live. There can be no deep disappointment where there is not deep love. Man must evolve for all human conflict, a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. There comes a time when people get tired of being pushed out of the glittering sunlight of life's July and left standing amid the piercing chill of an alpine November. We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. Non-violence is absolute commitment to the way of love. Love is not emotional bash. It is not empty sentimentalism. It is the active outpouring of one's whole being into the being of another. We are not makers of history. We are made by history. Rarely do we find men who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking. There is an almost universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solution. Nothing pains some people more than having to think. We must build dikes of courage to hold back the flood of fear. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. Hate is just as injurious to the hater as it is to the hated. Like an unchecked cancer, hate corrodes the personality and eats away its vital unity. Many of our inner conflicts are rooted in hate. This is why psychiatrists say, love or perish. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. In some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. We shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you. If one loves an individual merely on account of his friendliness, he loves him for the sake of the benefits to be gained from the friendship, rather than for the friend's own sake. Consequently, the best way to assure oneself that love is disinterested is to have love for the enemy neighbor from whom you can expect no good return, but only hostility and persecution. That's love, you see. It is redemptive, and this is why Jesus says love. There's something about love that builds up and is creative. There's something about hate that tears down and is destructive. So love your enemies. You know, a lot of people don't love themselves, and they go through life with deep and haunting emotional conflicts. So the length of life means that you must love yourself. And you know what loving yourself also means? It means that you've got to accept yourself. All we say to America is, be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly, somewhere I read of the freedom of speech, somewhere I read of the freedom of the press, somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. You can kill the dreamer, but you can't kill the dream. I want to be the white man's brother, not his brother-in-law. Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. A right delayed is a right denied. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. The hottest place in hell is reserved for those who remain neutral in times of great moral conflict. I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalist. Capitalism has outlived its usefulness. Capitalism has brought about a system that takes necessities from the masses to give luxuries to the classes. Capitalism has often left a gap of superfluous wealth and abject poverty, and has created conditions permitting necessities to be taken from the many to give luxuries to the few. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth in the country. Maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. What good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger? Jobs, however, are harder and costlier to create than voting rolls. We compress our abundance into the overfed mouths of the middle and upper classes until they gag with superfluidity. Call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all of God's children. And one day, we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you're raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalist economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. Capitalism forgets that life is social, and the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. We must recognize that we can't solve our problem now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. This means a revolution of values and other things. We must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. You can't really get rid of one without getting rid of the others. The whole structure of American life must be changed. America is a hypocritical nation, and we must put our own house in order. The evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and evils of racism. I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed matter, the guaranteed income. The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. It is socially as cruel and blind as the practice of cannibalism at the dawn of civilization, when men ate each other because they had not yet learned to take food from the soil or to consume the abundant animal life around them. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. You can't talk about solving the economic problem of the Negro without talking about billions of dollars. You can't talk about ending the slums without first saying profit must be taken out of slums. You're really tampering and getting on dangerous ground because you are messing with folk then. You are messing with captains of the industry. Now this means that we are treading in difficult water because it really means that we are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. Why is equality so assiduously avoided? Why does white America delude itself? And how does it rationalize the evil it retains? The majority of white Americans consider themselves sincerely committed to justice for the Negro. They believe that American society is essentially hospitality to fair play and to steady growth toward a middle-class utopia embodying racial harmony. But, unfortunately, this is a fantasy of self-deception and comfortable vanity. I contend that the cry of Black Power is, at bottom, a reaction to the reluctance of white power to make the kind of changes necessary to make justice a reality for the Negro. I think that we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the economic plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. But it is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met, and has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. Again, we have deluded ourselves into believing the myth that capitalism grew and prospered out of the Protestant ethic of hard work and sacrifice. The fact is that capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of black slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both black and white, both here and abroad. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. The reality of substantial investment to assist Negroes into the 20th century, adjusting to Negro neighbors and genuine school integration is still a nightmare for all too many white Americans. These are the deepest causes for contemporary abrasions between the races. Loose and easy language about equality, resonant resolutions about brotherhood fall pleasantly on the ear, but for the Negro, there is a credibility gap he cannot overlook. He remembers that with each modest advance, the white population promptly raises the argument that the Negro has come far enough. Each step forward extends an ever-present tendency to backlash. First, I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in this stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from the people of goodwill is more frustrating than the absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection.